That's your son. He looks like he fixes air conditioners." The words slipped through a veil of champagne and fake smiles, but I heard them as clearly as if they were meant for me. Mara Merriman, the bride's mother, wasn't whispering to be secretive, just performative, the kind of whisper that wanted to be overheard. Her voice dripped sugar, but the words cut. Brielle let out a breathy laugh, just loud enough. "Stop," she said, brushing her mother's arm. But she didn't deny it, didn't defend him, didn't look around to see if I was sitting just 2 chairs away. Ellis didn't flinch. He was pouring water into someone's glass, his posture calm, expression unreadable, but I saw his jaw tighten, just slightly, like a door closing. He didn't say anything, didn't make a scene. He simply placed the pitcher down, excused himself with that quiet charm I've seen since he was 10, and stepped out into the hallway. Everyone kept talking. The music played on. I stayed in my seat, holding my wine glass a little tighter, as if the cold in my palm could keep my heart from rising to my throat. No one looked at me. No one asked if I needed anything. I watched the door Ellis had walked through and wondered if I should follow him. But I didn't. Instead, I scanned the table. The place cards were lined up perfectly, arc-right, written in a thinner, lighter script, like we didn't quite belong in bold. I had worn my best dress simple, pressed, dignified. I'd been told the event was semi-formal, though apparently that meant something different in Merriman circles. Someone asked if I'd tried the fig and goat cheese tartlets. I nodded politely. I hadn't. My appetite had vanished with my son's smile. The next time I saw him was by the elevator. 30 minutes later, he was alone, staring at the floor numbers, hands in his pockets. "Cold out tonight," I said gently. He nodded. "Colder in there?" I didn't disagree. The sun was high, the wine cold, and every umbrella on the terrace was perfectly matched to the table linens. White roses, cream napkins, blush accents. The Merrimans didn't do casual, everything was designed for photos. I sat with the floral crew and the pastry vendor. My name hadn't made it onto the seating chart. No one noticed, or maybe they did, and thought it made sense. Mara Merriman raised her glass and tapped it gently. "To my daughter," she smiled, "who always follows her heart, even when it leads her away from pedigree and toward personality." A few people chuckled. The kind of laugh that says we all know what you really mean. I didn't look at Ellis right away. I already knew. When I finally turned, he was staring past the table, past the trees, past the brunch. Somewhere far, his face didn't change. He just blinked slowly, then reached for his glass like he hadn't heard a thing. But I knew better. He was swallowing something he didn't want to share. He didn't look at me, not once. I waited until after dinner, until the patio had emptied and the musicians were packing up their instruments. I walked the long hall to his room and knocked twice. He opened the door in a t-shirt, barefoot, still in his dress slacks. "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said, "just wanted to ask." He stepped aside and let me in. "Are you sure?" I said, careful not to raise my voice, "that this is the life you want?" He let out a soft exhale and smiled. Tired. Kind. The way he did when he was little and didn't want me to worry. "It'll be fine." "Mom," he said, "don't stir the pot." I didn't argue. I never do when he speaks like that. I touched his shoulder. Just once, then left without asking anything more. Back in my room, I took off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and sat at the window, replaying every word I hadn't said and every word they had. The rehearsal was almost over when I stepped outside to take a call that never came. I stood near the side lawn, just out of view of the patio, stretching my legs and pretending not to listen. Gideon's voice carried easily. "This wedding's her project," he said with a short laugh. "She insisted on marrying her charity case. At least he's got good manners. Another man an uncle, maybe, or a business partner chuckled along with him. She's always liked strays, the man added. She'll learn. No one corrected them. No one pushed back. The men clinked glasses and wandered back toward the catering tent. Still laughing, I waited a few moments, then walked past like I hadn't heard a thing. Inside, the dining room was bright and crowded. Candlelight caught on every glass, every fork. Brielle's uncle stood up to give his toast. He was red-cheeked and smug, holding his wine like it was a trophy. Here's to our girl, he said, raising his glass, who always followed her heart even when it didn't come with a trust fund. A few people laughed, not out loud, just enough to be felt. I glanced at Ellis. He kept smiling. That same practiced expression. Smooth and unreadable. He reached for Brielle's hand, held it lightly, and leaned in to kiss her temple. I wanted to grab his shoulders and shake the quiet out of him. Instead, I folded my napkin and placed it gently on the table. Excuse me, I said to no one in particular. I rose without waiting for a reply and walked toward the exit. The hallway was dim and quiet. Carpet soft under my heels. I reached the door, paused, and wiped my hands twice on my napkin. Not because they were dirty, but because they felt too clean for what I'd just sat through. Outside, the night was warm. The cicadas hummed. I didn't go far, just enough to breathe, and that's when I saw Ellis alone on the garden path, shoulders forward, staring at nothing. The wedding morning passed like fog, quiet, slow, too still to trust. I wore the gray dress I'd set aside months ago, the one with clean seams and no sparkle. My pearls weren't new, but they were honest. That felt important. When I arrived, no one directed me to a seat. I stood near the second row, waiting for someone to wave me over. No one did, so I took a spot near the aisle, alone. The ceremony was brief, polished, performed. Then came the reception. The Merrimans had spared no expense. Ice sculptures, a live quartet, 3 kinds of seafood. I stood near the edge of the room while everyone else found their tables. My place card was tucked at a corner table with vendors and distant friends. I didn't complain. I just sat. When Gideon stood to give his toast, the room quieted like a stage curtain falling. To our daughter, he said, swirling his wine. She has always been full of vision. She sees potential in everyone, even where it's hard to find. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it spread like heat. I looked at Ellis. He smiled, as usual. The same smile he'd worn for 2 days. The same one that told me nothing. Then, slowly, he stood. He reached for the microphone, cleared his throat, and offered a nod to the guests. Thank you, everyone, for being here. He began, it means a lot to both of us. He paused. We might not do a honeymoon after all, he said, eyes scanning the room. There's something I want to clarify first. The air changed. I felt it before anyone else moved. Ellis turned to the event manager. Could we get 5 minutes and a screen? The manager blinked. Of course, sir. Brielle shifted in her chair. Her smile faltered. Ellis stepped down from the dais and walked calmly toward the AV table near the wall. No one clapped. No one moved. Just the faint click of a USB drive and the quiet hum of something long overdue. I folded my hands in my lap as the lights dimmed, and the screen lit up. The first slide appeared without sound. Just a clean white page. Ellis's name typed neatly at the top, then another state filings, patent numbers, registration documents. A few guests leaned forward, confused. Some frowned. No one spoke. The next slide shifted to photos Ellis standing beside early hardware models, speaking at small tech conferences, shaking hands with engineers twice his age. I recognized the shirt he wore in one picture. It was the one he used to wash in the sink when he couldn't afford dry cleaning. Murmurs drifted through the room as a final slide came up bold letters, sharp and undeniable. Ellis Arkwright, CEO. A ripple moved across the bride's side of the room. Chairs creaked. A woman at the front put a hand to her mouth. Someone whispered. What as if the word itself might change the truth on the screen? Brielle's eyes widened, dark and stunned, her fork suspended in midair. She looked at Ellis like he'd broken into the room wearing someone else's life. It was the first time all evening she had nothing to say. My hands remained folded in my lap. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just breathed in slowly, out slowly, letting the moment wash over me without touching the surface of my face. Ellis stepped back to the microphone, calm as a man reading his own name off an envelope. I didn't hide this out of shame, he said. I just needed to know who loved me without needing proof of worth. No anger, no edge, just the truth, spoken quietly in a room that had spent days pretending not to see him. He set the microphone down, walked past the tables, past the stairs, past the sudden silence, and came toward me. Then he offered me his arm. My fingers didn't shake when I took it. I rose beside him, steady, as if this moment had always been waiting in the wings. Ellis nodded toward the exit, and together we stepped forward into the space he had finally claimed. The house was quiet when we got back. No music, no voices, just the hum of the porch light and the soft creak of the swing as Ellis poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. He handed me mine, then sat beside me, shoulders loose for the first time in days. I never liked those chairs they rented, he said after a moment, almost smiling. Too shiny. We rocked for a while without talking. The air was thick with everything that hadn't been said in that ballroom. Do you remember the cabin, he asked suddenly? The one up near Claremont Ridge? He nodded. You sold it to pay my rent that first year. I pawned the ring too, I said, sipping. Didn't get much for it, but it kept your internet on. Ellis looked down, thumb tracing the rim of his mug. I meant to buy it back for you. You always paid me back, I said, just not with money. He sat with that a moment, then said, quieter. I always knew Brielle's family didn't think I measured up. You never said. I wanted to believe love would cover that gap. I watched his face as he said it. Still kind, still hopeful in places but sharper around the edges now. Love needs truth to stand on, I said. He nodded once. Slow. Yeah. We listened to the night breathe around us. Somewhere down the street. A dog barked once and went quiet again. The wedding didn't happen, he said. I didn't correct him. There'd been a ceremony, but no vows. No beginning. Only a door that closed without a lock behind it. The marriage was already over, he added. It just hadn't fallen apart yet. He leaned back, letting the swing settle beneath us. You okay? I asked. I am now. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the old receipt from the pawn shop, folded into fourths. I kept this all these years. I took it, unfolded it gently, and placed it between the pages of my notebook. He looked at me, then out at the dark, and said, They're going to start calling. The first call came 2 days later. I let it ring. Then came the emails, addressed to both of us, apologies disguised as reflections, statements dressed as questions. We never meant to offend. It was all in jest. You know how these things can be. Gideon sent a revised business proposal, sleeker, more generous, with projections and flattery tucked between every line. He wrote as if the room hadn't laughed at his toast, as if the truth hadn't lit up on a screen for everyone to see. Then Brielle wrote, a letter in her own handwriting, cream paper, no perfume. She said she was hurt, said she didn't know, said she thought he'd told her everything. I thought it was about us. She wrote, but I see now I missed something deeper. I read it once, then folded it into thirds and slipped it into the drawer where I keep expired coupons and tangled ribbons. Not out of spite, just to keep it where it belonged, among things once useful. Now set aside. Ellis never replied. Not to a single word. Instead, he put his name to something new. He rented a modest hall in town, invited a few local teachers, brought in laptops and extension cords. The sign outside read, "The Arkwright Initiative." He gave a short speech at the opening. "I'm not here because someone handed me a title," he said. "I'm here because one person believed in me when it made no sense to—" He didn't mention me by name, but I felt the weight of his glance across the room. That was enough. He added, "Invest where people believe in you early. That's the only kind of capital that doesn't collapse." The kids applauded, not because they understood every word, but because they saw someone standing where they might be one day. Afterward, he found me by the coffee table, handed me a sugar packet without asking, and said, "We're going to need a bigger room next time." I smiled and stirred my cup, just as my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Again, the chairs were mismatched. Some creaked when people sat. The aisle was a footpath lined with smooth river stones, and the music came from a speaker balanced on a cooler. Ellis didn't wear a tux, just a white shirt with sleeves rolled up and a tie that looked like it had seen better interviews. He smiled the whole time, not politely, not for anyone watching, but from somewhere quiet inside. There were maybe 30 of us, old friends. A few kids from his program. Neighbors who brought pie. No one asked about seating arrangements. No one asked me to move. I wore a dress with pockets and a sun hat I'd found in a thrift store 3 towns over. No one commented on it. It was just a hat, and that was enough. Elena, his bride, walked over to me before the ceremony started. She was calm, her shoes sensible, her makeup barely there. She held a small bouquet, hand tied with fraying ribbon. "I'd like you to hold these until I walk," she said, smiling like we'd known each other longer than we had. I stood as she stepped into place, clutching the bouquet lightly. It smelled like garden herbs and wildflowers. When the music began, she took the flowers back from me, nodded once, and stepped down the path toward my son. I watched his face, not for nerves or hesitation, but for something deeper, and I saw it, a kind of peace that doesn't need applause to feel real. There were no speeches, just a short reading, vows they wrote themselves. No talk of pedigrees or potential, just promises spoken plainly, held gently. When it was done, they kissed like they were home. We all clapped softly, but only because it felt natural, not expected. Later, I helped Elena serve lemonade in mason jars and handed out cloth napkins a woman from church had stitched. Ellis stood by the river, shoes off, pants rolled, watching the water with a grin that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. I walked over to him, and he looked up like he'd been waiting. It had been tucked behind a stack of receipts in the back of the drawer, creased from too many foldings. The ink faded just slightly along the edges. I recognized my own handwriting instantly. I hadn't meant to keep it, but I hadn't meant to send it either. It began plainly, Brielle, and then you could have had everything, but you didn't see the man, you saw the resume. You memorized his smile, but never studied his silences. That's where the real parts were. I read it once, standing in the middle of the kitchen, the morning sun creeping across the counter. Then I tore it in half, and again, and again. The sink hissed softly when I lit the edges. The ashes curled into themselves without protest, slipping into the drain like they'd never been here at all. Later that evening, Ellis let himself in with 2 bags of takeout and a crooked grin. "Don't get excited," he said, setting them down. "I cooked, but only the rice. The rest is from Nita's." We spread out a blanket on the floor and opened the containers, stewed greens, a chicken dish full of spice, rice that somehow didn't stick together, Hot enough, he asked. I took a bite and coughed. It's alive. He laughed so hard he dropped his fork. We didn't talk about old things. No mentions of weddings or money or the past in any formal way. Just the movie playing low on the screen and the rhythm of spoons clinking against plastic bowls. Next time, I said between bites. I'll cook. No offense, he said. But I've seen your pantry. You like canned soup. I said I tolerate canned soup. We laughed again. The kind of laugh that doesn't echo in an empty house. The kind that stays. The air smelled like garlic and something sharp, maybe ginger. His knees bumped mine as we reached for more rice. Pass the good stuff, he said. You've already got it, I answered, handing him the last dumpling. It arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between the electric bill and a grocery flyer. No return address. No stamp. Even Ellis must have dropped it off himself. Just a plain white envelope with my name written in his blocky, careful print. Inside was a single page. A deed. The cabin. The one I sold when no one else believed in him yet. It was back in my name. Tucked behind the document was a note, scribbled on torn notebook paper. For everything you never asked for, but gave anyway. I sat for a while without moving. The kettle hissed on the stove. The radio played something soft in the background, but I didn't hear any of it. My eyes kept going back to the address. The ink, the signature. 2 days later, I packed a bag and drove north. The road hadn't changed much. The same turnoff, the same gravel crunch under the tires. When I reached the cabin, the trees leaned in like they remembered me. I unlocked the door. The key turned without resistance. The air inside was still, but not stale, just quiet. I opened the windows wide, letting the breeze sweep through like a guest who'd been waiting a long time to be let in. Dust lifted gently from the floorboards. Light filtered in at an angle I'd forgotten, low and golden, hitting the wood just where my old rocking chair used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't smile, either. I just stood in the doorway with my hand still on the knob, letting the weight of it all settle in. This wasn't about real estate. It was about being seen, about being remembered not as support staff in someone else's success, but as part of the foundation. I set my bag down and walked to the back porch. The boards creaked just the same. I sat on the old step and looked out over the pines. Ellis hadn't called. He didn't need to. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't a repayment. It was just a door, quietly opened, leading me back to something I'd never expected to return.